Welcome to Home Tiny Lab. My name is Christoph, and this video is going to be the first part on how to configure a DNS server in your home lab or in an operational environment. That's up to you. Here I am going to start with what you could call a caching-only DNS server, or what could be your home lab or your home network. Here we are logged into Xen Orchestra, so I am using XCP-ng as a hypervisor, and I will do the demonstration with two virtual machines. One virtual machine will act as the DNS server, and the other one will be the client. Let's go to a terminal session. So in my I have already opened the terminal session onto the virtual machine that I'm using as a server. The virtual machine is a basic installation of Rocky Linux. So to have a DNS server up and running, you have to install, if you are using bind 9, you have to install the necessary packages. So I'm going to install from a vanilla installation, minimal installation of Rocky Linux, the packages that I will be using. So this is done by DNF install, and the first package is bind, and then the second is bind utils. Very important to do some troubleshooting or to look how the DNS is behaving. So let's install this. Now that the packages are installed, we can go and have a look at the configuration file for the service. Make this a little bit smaller, and let's go up in the file. So at the start, everything will be bind to the local address, and only the local host will have permission to use the DNS server. So this is defined here, and for IP6 also. And then you have the directory and the files that are used for the DNS service. And then you have what's allowed to use the DNS server. Local host IP address and local host are the only ones that can bind to the IP port and use the DNS service. All other things will be for other videos. So if you want to see the series that I'm doing about DNS, don't forget to subscribe and to click on the bell to be notified, because it's not every week that I will continue on this topic. I am only releasing monthly a video. That's what I try to achieve, because I have a full-time job to do. Things that we will see further on in the other videos is the logging, and for instance, also the zones. But let's continue with launching our cached-only DNS server. So now that we have seen the file, there is another important command, and that's called named-checkconf. And by default, it will verify the etc named.conf. So if I press enter and it doesn't give a result, that means that the file is correctly, without syntax errors, done. Let's start the service now. So without changing anything to the named.conf file, we are going to start the service, and this is done with systemctl start named. Enter. And now if we do status, for the moment, we have some unreachable resolving because IP6 is not configured, and this is something that we are going to address on the server also. For instance, if I would now use the dig command, with this I can interrogate domains. So for instance, if I do dig of google.com, it will answer with the A records and the IP addresses that correspond to the domain. And here you see the server that did the resolving. And this is not the server that I am now running here. So to have a response of the server that I'm using, I would have to add localhost, and again google.com, and now it's the localhost that did the resolving, and it took 337 milliseconds. If I do this a second time, it answers faster because it's in the cache. You have also here the TTL value. So if I would try this again, you see that the TTL value is decreasing. And when this value is again at 0, it will refetch or resolve with a higher DNS authority. We have proven that the local DNS service is running, but it's not for the DNS server himself configured to be used. We can see this in the resolve file. Let's clear this and let's do this again. So here you see name server, and you see my other DNS servers that I'm running in my normal network, and those are the firewall appliances. I will have to change this at my server. This is generated by the network manager, and there is a utility to change, and this is nmt UI. Enter, edit connection, edit, let's go to show, and here we can add the DNS server, and let's say that it is 127.0.0.1, which is the local host. And if we go further down and we select ignore automatically obtained DNS parameters, it will not be those from the DHCP server given. I have configured the DHCP server to give a static IP to this virtual machine. In an operational environment, configure your DNS server as a static IP. For me, this is good enough. It's in a lab, and my lab is not something that I am using 24/7. It's only for do some testing like I'm doing now and to make tutorials. So let's quit this completely. If I would now check the resolve, it's still the old values. I have to restore the network manager service to have the new values added to this file. So to do this, we know the command already. It's systemctl and restart, and this new network manager restarting. And if we do now a cut of the resolve.conf file, we see that the name server has been changed. So I am overriding the values given by the DHCP server. So if I would now do dig without parameters, only the domain that I want to query for, it is the local host that is answering. So now I have a DNS server, and the only client is the local host itself. I have a limited usage now for this server, but we are going to address this also. There are a few other commands very interesting to know. For instance, you have seen that records are cached and that they are kept there until their TTL is at 0, and then it will refetch to see if there are no changes for the IP address for that domain. To know what's in the cache, there is also another command, and that's the command rndc. And with this we can dump the cache. The directory and the file where the cache is now dumped is defined in the named.conf file. So if I have a look at the named.conf file and I go a little bit up, you will see dump file is in the var name data, and the file is called cache_dump db. let's clear this again. And we have dumped now what we actually add in our cache. And we did, the only query of a domain was the google.com domain. So let's have a look if it is in the cache. To do this, let's use the grab command and let's put the complete domain to grab. And now we are going to the file. It was in data and it was, if I don't mistake, cache underscore dump.db. And we see that the record was in the cache. If we would now do a cache dump again, and again look at the file, we will see that values have been changed here for the TTL. It's a little bit stupid to only have a DNS for one client. In my case, I want that all my clients in my labo can be using this DNS server in the future. So to do this, I have to change something in the named.conf file. So let's have a look at the named.conf file again. And with vi, because we want to change something in that file. And if we go to the options line, there we have the local host that is present for listen on port. And now let's add the IP address of this server. And let's define the network that can access this DNS, for the moment cache only server, and the network is, oops, this is something that I didn't want to have. Oh, this is nicer, and this is 0, and it is a 24 subnet. And let's save this file or save those changes and check the file. So we had a command for this. And no syntax errors. Let's try if a client can access the server now, but first let's restart the named service. Let's go to status to see if it works, and it works. Okay, let's clear this. So now, normally from a client, I should be able to connect to the server, but let's check if everything is well configured. Let's grab to listen, and this should be enough. And I see here that the IP address is listening to 53 and also still to the local host. So this is to verify really quickly if everything has well been restarted. And let's check if my firewall is good configured also. Normally by default there is always a firewall installed with the minimum installation. I have a syntax fault, it's firewall. Okay, and in services you will see that there is no DNS service present. So this is something that we have to add. And this is done with this command. And we want it permanent added. And it is a service that we are going to add. And it is the DNS service. And we are going to do this for zone public. Now we still have to reload the rules, and let's check this again with a list all, and we see now that DNS is added for inbound traffic. Another thing that is very useful is to see the logs. So the logs, the errors that the DNS is giving output in the log in the file messages. So here you will see, for instance, network unreachable resolving. This is still something to address, but we will do this. But now let's first go to a client to check if it is well working. Which client did I have configured? It was 116 as IP. Let's log into this virtual machine. 116. Wrong password, I think. Wrong password. So this is now correct as a password. So now let's check the resolve.conf file to see if I am using the correct server, and this is the correct one. So the client is already well configured. It's the same thing as in the on the server, where I used nmtui to configure the correct DNS server. Let's try now to query for the google.com domain, and this worked. He used the correct server and the correct domain and correct IP address. Okay, so if you do this a second time, it is faster. So one of the commands on the server that you can do is, for instance, flush the cache also. So if I would do now the flush command with rndc, and I would do now on my client a query, it will take a longer time because it was not anymore in the cache. And if I do this now a second time, it's faster because it was in the cache of the server. To look if something is in the cache, we have seen that we have to dump it to a file and then query the file. What's another important thing that we should address is to eliminate the IP6 resolves. So for this we have to go to a file in another place. It's in etc sysconfig, and it is the file named. So I made this a little bit smaller, and let's add options equal to -4, and let's write this file. So now we have we have to restart the named service, and if we open the log file to see if we are going to have some errors, there are no errors for this moment. We already had, when we were restarting service, we had already IP6 results that were not going correctly. And now let's go to the client and do a dig again of google.com, which is not anymore in the cache because I restarted the named service on the server. So there is a long fetch, and it's still the correct server, and no errors generated for IP6 protocol. Let's make this bigger again, and let's leave the output of the log file. And now there is still one thing to do. We want the service to start when the virtual machine is rebooted. Very important for services like DNS, because they are for operational usage. They have to be working all the time. And in my lab, it's not running 24/7. So when I am powering down all my servers and I would restart, I would like that my environment is started like it should be to work properly. So let's do now systemctl enable named. At the next reboot, the named service will be started up. So for this video, I'm going to stop here, and in the next part we will see how we can configure zones to configure proper domain names. So we can even in our local network use a top-level domain name. So this can make your lab a little bit easier to use, and it's a nice thing to learn in a lab environment. So this will be for part 2. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.